Welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. We're all about the places where design and development overlap. We talk with the industry experts about trends in design, development, and take a look at new ways to build digital experiences, typically over a beer or two. Today we have Micah Godbolt. Micah is a front-end architect and software engineer for the Fluent design system over at Microsoft. He's also a writer, blogger, and speaker. You can follow him pretty much everywhere using Micah Godbolt. That's Twitter, his website, etc. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Knapsack. Check us out at knapsack.cloud or at knapsackcloud on Twitter. If you want to get in touch with the show, ask some questions, or generally tell us what you think, go ahead and tweet us at the DS Pod. We'd love to hear from you. Micah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's great to see you again and talk to you again. It's been a while. It's always good to catch up.
For our listeners, Mike and I used to work together back in an agency a while ago, and we've known each other actually since the Drupal world long ago. Well, hey, very excited to have you on. We got a lot of interesting stuff to chat about today. First and foremost, just if you want to explain a little bit about what you do at Microsoft with Fluent, I'm definitely curious to hear more about how things have evolved over the past couple of years there and what you guys are really working on.
I've been with the company for 3.5 years or so now, and joined originally to work with a design system that was being built at the time that was called Fabric. Spent a lot of time working on that as an engineer, as well as a program manager, and then just recently switching back over to an engineering role to continue to work on the project. About at the same time as we transitioned from the old Fabric name to the new Fluent name. Shortly after we built out the set of controls we called Fabric, Microsoft decided to come up with a design system of their own, and they called it Fluent, of course. Nice and confusing. So there's a lot of confusion about like, hey, what's what, and so forth. And we were slowly moving Fabric to kind of take on the look and feel of Fluent. And then eventually it was the manifestation of Fluent in web framework. And so we're like, hey, we got to get these names aligned and get things less confusing. So now we're working with Fluent UI, helping to build out controls, documentation, and help teams onboard and use the controls and contribute to the controls because it's completely open source.
Awesome. And what does Fluent power?
Right now, a large majority of the applications, web applications within Microsoft, especially on the Office side, are driven by a large chunk of the Fluent UI controls. And on top of that, Fluent as a design language is also manifested in lots of other products as well that don't use specifically our like Fluent UI React library. But we are also building out those libraries in iOS and Android and Windows, React Native, Mac, everywhere. So another one of the reasons to bring Fabric under this umbrella is that Fabric was just one. It was pretty much just a web of React components. But bringing it into this family of UI libraries, we're now part of this much larger effort to get a singular design language spread throughout the entire organization through the various platforms and operating systems it needs to be on.
So that's awesome. And I particularly like that you guys are so focused on this multi-application, multi-environment kind of model with your design system. You know, as we're all well aware, it's actually really challenging to try to get a design system that can power native apps, power websites, power all of these sort of third-party products that exist in this broader digital ecosystem that most enterprises have. Talk to me a little bit about how you guys support things like native apps and how you really have created this more multifaceted approach to a design system.
There's multiple ways we come at the design systems. With Fabric, we came at the design system from more of a code standpoint of like, how can we organize around code and shared code? And how can we create this one button in code and all of us use that one button in code? But you can also come from a design system from the design standpoint of how can we create designs, distribute designs, agree upon designs, and across products that we then get actually implemented down in those products. So for a long time, Fluent was really just a visual language, a design language that dictated how an app should look. How you actually implement that was really up to those teams. So we're kind of at this point where the design teams have been working together trying to have a common visual language. We've had engineering teams, not just web, but also React Native and iOS and Android, who've been trying to build a set of shared controls, now starting to kind of meet in the middle, where we had shared code, we had shared design, and now we can all come together under Fluent. We're able to bring those into one place where we're not just sharing code, but we're sharing the code that shares the design that we're all trying to get together upon.
Well, and so from a practical standpoint, like what does that look like? So do you have components that exist in code that are being reused on native apps via like React Native and also on web apps? Is it something that is more broad based than that, of like, hey, we're sharing design tokens and some prototyping? What does that really look like from a practical
Yeah,
standpoint?
we went down that path when we first started looking at React Native. We started creating React Native controls that could render out into every single platform. So the same control could render out into web and onto Windows and iOS and Android and Mac and then just everywhere it could go. But we found really quickly that the differences in the platform, the differences of like the visual needs of the platform and the functional needs for each platform became such a hindrance to get that component to work properly that it was not feasible to do. This whole concept of like write once, run everywhere, as amazingly wonderful as it sounds, these are just very disparate systems. And we found it was causing more trouble than it was really worth. So we stepped back from that and recognized, let's build the best UI toolkit we can for each platform. And let's make sure that we have consistent concepts, that it doesn't feel foreign going from one to the other. But as you mentioned, when we want to start getting our designs aligned, we need the same colors, we need the same font ramps, the same size ramps. We need to be able to modify those at the same time. So like, sure, on the web, we might be working in pixels, and other platforms, we might be working in some other units of measure, but we can still go back to that token and say, hey, let's tweak that token up 5%, and all the values move that 5% as well. So that's the direction we're going right now, is to try and get all those designs aligned on a single set of tokens that can drive all of those products.
Gotcha. So when you're talking about like your brand UI or your style guide that is representative of those design tokens, like you kind of think of that as like the rules that are being passed down from design that are broadly applicable to a lot of different apps, a lot of different circumstances, and a lot of different contexts for those apps. And then you actually have the code itself, which is a little bit more segmented, where it exists as a segment for that particular application or for that particular use case for that application. And the idea is like, let's make those things best in breed, but let's connect them all through this broader design language.
There's no way right now. I mean, maybe in the future, everything will get a little bit closer, or everything will just use web technology, where we can have just a single set of code that will run everywhere. But at this point, like, I was using like the Zoom app on web versus an old crappy Android tablet. And their Android app is just way better. I mean, it processes audio better, less lagging, less everything. Like everything's still very different between different platforms, and that's gonna be a long time down the road. But we can at least tie together those visual aspects of like the colors that are being used, and again, type ramps and shadows and everything. Not just so we can get them aligned once, because again, like getting them aligned once is just effort. You get enough people to do it and you can do it. But the question is, once they're aligned once, how do you then make modifications and changes? If you have a bug in some accessibility bug of like a couple contrast ratios, how can you fix that bug once and then propagate that to the rest of the system?
No, and also I think that applies broadly too to like brand updates, right? So if Microsoft Blue ever changes, right? What does that change look like, and how do you roll that out across like this broader ecosystem?
The ability to make those changes. I mean, I don't see Microsoft changing our brand colors too soon. Who knows? Maybe they're cooking up something now. I don't know. But really, the bigger thing is that we build UI that works in the Microsoft ecosystem of our colors and our branding. But we also want to make UI that works in other ecosystems and other branding. If you look at SharePoint, one of the biggest parts of that is that you're able to theme your SharePoint site to look like your brand. Coca-Cola uses SharePoint, and they want Coca-Cola red. They don't want our blue color or whatever it's going to be. So we need to make sure that we can theme all of our UI, and even better, that we can theme all of our UI in a consistent way. So you don't have to go and theme the web, and then go theme the Mac app, then go theme the Windows app. If each of those is a different process to have to do theming and take a completely different team to theme it, that's just a ton of extra work that we could mitigate by having a common set of tokens. And that's really the goal of that is, yes, it's great to get those things aligned, but really supporting the ability to theme and to theme across multiple endpoints. Like, I don't think we're ever going to get to write once, run everywhere for apps, but I think we can get there with themes, have like really good, strong tokens.
No, and I think that's the power of theming and tokens, and what essentially amounts to defining these key value pairs that represent the rules of how you apply design. And that ability to scale that across lots of different apps. And for Microsoft, with thousands of applications, but also this gigantic, really robust partner ecosystem where, not only are you not in control of all of your app code in one place, you're certainly not in control of all the code that your partners are writing on top of your apps. And so, how do you start to tackle those problems of kind of the ripple effect of scale out well beyond, the Fluent team?
Yeah, and we've had to deal with that for a long time. The Fabric actually was born out of the SharePoint team, the OneDrive team. So we've been dealing with the problem of, I've got my SharePoint web part on the page and I've got a third-party SharePoint thing on the page, and oh my gosh, like they don't look the same, or the CSS is bleeding out of one into the other, or there's different versions or something. So it's been a problem we've had to deal with for a long time. And the route that we ended up going, years ago when we tried to solve it, was we had to go CSS and JS. We had to realize that, every component rendered to the page needs to be able to render without influence from the rest of the app. Like if I want this thing to render with a different theme, like at runtime, because someone's up here sliding a slider, at runtime we needed to say, hey, this is going to be a completely different set of colors. So we had to do that at runtime with CSS and JS. Fortunately, that won't be the case forever. Eventually, IA11 is going to disappear and die a fiery death. And that means that we will be able to basically do the exact same thing with custom attributes or CSS variables.
I'm glad to hear that from you, given that, IE11 causes us a tremendous amount of pain, and hearing it directly from someone within the Microsoft Design System team, that it causes you some pain too.
So much pain. Yeah, when I joined the team 3.5 years ago and I saw the way that we did theming, I was like, oh, we should use CSS variables. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. it's not going to work. And so, yeah, I mean, finally, years later, we're to the point where, the end is in sight. Chromium Edge is dramatically changing the timeline that, that we can see IE11 disappear.
Right.
And so we're seeing the writing on the wall. We're recognizing that, we need to start planning now for what the world's going to look like without IE11 and what we're going to do. So yeah, moving forward, we're investing in CSS variables and just recognizing that we can do the same things. We can have, part of an app be a different theme without breaking the rest of the application. We can keep things scoped like that. We can also do a one-off. If we want one button that has a different theme than the rest of the buttons, we don't have to go and build, button number 97. That one button can get a new set of tokens directly into it. Everything we've needed to do with CSS and JS in the past, we really can do now with CSS variables. I actually did a talk several months ago now, kind of going through all the problems we had that we solved with CSS variables that we solved with CSS and JS that we can now solve with CSS variables. And it's exciting to see that we will get there at some point, and we'll be able to have a better runtime, better bundle size, and just better user experience in general.
So how else have things evolved over the past, 3.5 years? Is what Fabric, which became Fluent, was at the start, is obviously not what it's like today. So, what were the big inflection points that you faced along this journey? Because it's rare to get to see a window into a corporation like Microsoft's design system journey that is looking at this at scale. And also, I know that, there's more than one design system at Microsoft. So how do these things interact with each other? Do they interact with each other? And how has that vision evolved?
I guess there's a couple questions got wrapped up in there, like what things have changed. And that brought me one direction. But then also working with other design systems, that's another big one. I'll tackle that one first. There definitely are multiple design systems at Microsoft, and we recognize that what we're building doesn't work for everyone. And actually, this comes up that the problem with CSS and JS, there's a cost to running all your styles at runtime. And we've had partners that use us in the past that stopped using us because of the fact that CSS and JS was the only way for styles to get injected into our controls. There really was no other way around it. You're going to pay the cost of that, in download size and render time and everything.
Right. There's a trade-off that you have to take when you take that flexibility along with it.
At least in the way that it was engineered and in the way that it was architected. Because the components and that rendering, that CSS and JS rendering method were completely intertwined. There's no separation of the two. And one thing that we recognize is moving forward, we want to make sure there's a separation between how a component gets styled and the process to style it. Because we'd like to be able to support in the future, like basically pretty much just a class interface where we can pass like CSS class names through. And the way those class names are generated can be anything. So, I mean, you could generate those class names with CSS and JS. You could generate it with CSS modules. You could have just a static CSS file. You can do whatever you want to do if we have that interface be dumb, is really what it comes down to.
Right, a much less opinionated way of making decisions.
Instead of passing through some values and then the component doing all the magic to figure out what the class should be, we needed to separate those two out. And that was a problem that we made in marrying those two together. And it lost us some people using the product because of that. So that's one thing that we had to overcome. And we're hoping that at some point we can kind of align back together with some of these other teams. And the other is just the speed at which we can move. And actually, I can tie these two things together. So one of the problems that we ran into with a project like Fabric is we grew a lot, and we didn't have a dedicated team for a long time that actually supported the product.
Yeah, and I think that's not uncommon, right? You have all of these different organizations that are trying to prove the value and like really prove the ROI of these design systems that they're building. And as they're on the journey to do that, like things change and shift because the scale shifts.
Yeah, so we got to a point where we just couldn't support the product well enough. We didn't have enough people to do all the reviews and to really have good guidance around what code could get in. And so the product kind of ballooned and ballooned. It was a great place to basically dump your code so you could share with other people. But once it was dumped in there, it was free code, kind of like free puppies. These things grow. And we just got a new Corona puppy, and they pee everywhere, and that's what puppies are like. Is like, yeah, great. Like it wasn't free either, but the problem with the code that was given to us is like, so the tax that we paid in bringing all those code in is that we started to build up a good bit of debt. And that debt made it really hard for us to move with much velocity. And that was another challenge that we had with teams that were wanting to move fast and build things quick and iterate quick and move really quickly in the products that they're building. We couldn't support that because we had this very large legacy code base. We have lots of partners that depend on our controls, and we couldn't just make major changes without disrupting large parts of the organization.
Gotcha. So you guys became almost a bottleneck of sorts to some of your innovation because you had a success,
yes.
Right?
Too much success.
So success bred some friction in between you and some of the other people that needed to move and innovate more quickly.
Exactly. So we had other groups that had to build their own framework because we just really couldn't move fast enough for the work they need to do. They need to move fast, innovate, and move. The goal then is how do we bring those back together? And that's kind of been what happened when we came under Fluent UI. We recognized it's not just Fabric, some project over in this part of the org and some other project over in a different part of the org, but like we need to come under this single banner because we have this goal of being able to share a component, drop the component into Outlook, and it looks great. Take the component, drop it into Teams, looks great. It looks like it belongs in every single one of those environments, and not in a way that we have to duplicate effort to make it look right in Teams and to make it look right in Outlook. So getting to that elevation and having that company support of saying this is a product that's important to us. Here's the staffing to make sure that we have design coherence that's driven through code coherence, and we can all come together in a single place is really what we need to do.
You guys have gotten over the hump, that shift, if you will, from being something that is an insurgency, that is sort of this experiment, to being something that is a lot more of looking like the way that you're going to do things as a
Exactly.
company.
Yeah, we've proven out the model that it works, but it's expensive. I mean, it's something that relative to what we get back, it's not expensive, but it is a cost to be able to continue to support and make the product into what it needs to be. And I think we got to the point where we've proven that out. And that the value that comes out of it is well worth it. And so we're fortunate in a place now where we're getting investment and we're getting buy-in and we're able to make some movement forward.
So Microsoft's a pretty data-driven place. What sort of metrics did you collect or what evidence did you use to really prove that value and get this buy-in and this commitment from the organization to continue to invest in the design system? Because like you said, these things aren't cheap, right? Like building a design system at scale for a large enterprise right now is literally millions of dollars. And so how do you get an organization like Microsoft to spend millions of dollars on a design system. How do you prove that that's a valuable investment?
It's tough. I wish we had like way better analytics. I mean, that's one of the challenges of really any project is, how can you track usage, especially quality usage over time? We were at a point where, we track like all of the repos across like all the organization and whatnot. And we're able to get some decent analytics out of those. So we're able to like dig in and find out like how many hundreds of projects are installing this NPM package, but like, which components are they using and how are they using them? And like, did they install it and use the button, or did they install it and use everything? We don't have analytics that bring us that far, and it'd be great to be able to do that. So past that, it's really kind of just bringing our passion to the organization and really making that plea, showing examples of where the value manifests and being able to point to those just over and over and over again, and showing how shared code is able to solve problems. Shared code is able to bring multiple disparate teams together to work together. Shared code is actually able to light up scenarios that we weren't able to do before. So really a lot of it was anecdotal to be able to like show these different experiences and how those experiences really add up to a large value. And I think we're at that like kind of that tipping point where it's now obvious, like with a shared UI library, we can do X, Y, and Z. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. We need to continue to do that. We see the value in that proposition, and we need to invest in it to make that even more of a reality. So fortunately, awesome. It wasn't metrics. We didn't have to show some like, number usage. We didn't have to show, dollars coming back. We just had to show like where the scenarios that our code's able to support.
What's interesting is I've actually been pimping the heck out of the post that Jason Blackheart made, maybe a month ago now, that talked about the header and the creation of that header being something that was like, I don't know, I remember exactly the numbers, but like 40 hours or something like that. And then 11 teams consuming that and saving something like 800 engineering hours, right?
Exactly.
I think that there's obviously nuance that is absent from a statement like that, and it is somewhat anecdotal, but at the same time that simplicity of drawing the line of I invest over here in my design system and the rewards I reap are not having to remake that investment 11 times across these 11 different product teams. And that might be good enough to be showing the right kind of ROI to continue to get investment for systems like this.
Yeah, because for us, a lot of it is coherence. Like we don't want to be identical. There's never a question like Teams is going to look like Teams and Outlook's going to look like Outlook, but we want that coherence, that it feels like the experience is the same, so that like all of our our navigation, all of our search boxes, all of our drop downs, like we want those experiences to feel similar, and we don't want to go from one where this is amazing and I love the keyboard support and I can tab through and arrows, and then over here like shoot, nothing works and my experience is very disjointed and it's hard to use this product. Like just one of those apps is going to make everything else feel much worse than it could have been. So it's a strong guide for us.
Yeah, and I like how you brought up the idea that it's not just about how it looks, it's also how it works. The behavior is an important part of understanding that like a design system, sure, it's a collection of these digital experiences, but those digital experiences are more than visual. It's actually the interaction model as well that's really important.
Completely. And using React, that's really what we're able to bring to the table, is bringing really good focus management, really good keyboard control, really good high contrast, really good narrator support. Like how can we bring that full experience? Not just, is my button the right color and the right font size? It's like, does it behave and perform the way it should? Is it performant in the way it should? Is it accessible in the way it should? Does it interact in the way it should? And being able to basically just write that once and propagate that everywhere is a huge value add.
It's funny. I actually really liked the Windows Phone UI for exactly that reason. Like I maybe was, potentially an unpopular opinion, but I really enjoyed the fact that the interaction model across every app on the Windows Phone was the same, because I felt like I didn't have to learn a different app every time I opened up a different thing. And I understand like the idea of like, hey, maybe app developers felt kind of stymied and stifled by that. But at the same time, at least within a single company, if I'm using a Microsoft software product, I want it to look and feel and behave the way that other Microsoft products do.
Exactly.
And I think that that's an important goal to understand is maybe that's not a full ecosystem thing. Like maybe not every app in your app store should behave and look and feel the same way, but at least every one that you control should. And I think that that's kind of an interesting aspirational goal to design systems, is Just trying to think about that inside of everybody's organization.
Yeah, and just trying to get that change perception of our apps from hundreds of teams building completely separate applications to a single company building a large library of applications that feel like they're a single collection of apps is the goal.
Talk to me about innovation in that realm then. Like, has this changed the way that you guys think about innovation? Because one of the ways that I see design systems sort of changing the world, right, is everything had this narrow innovation focus for a really long time, right? Like I innovated in Outlook, I innovated in Teams, I innovated in SharePoint. And it was really hard to capture the innovation in each of those individual products and move that innovation to another product. Has your design system changed that model at all? Do you feel like all of the products sort of advance simultaneously because they're all using these same experiences?
Yeah, and I think maybe for a slightly different reason. One of the goals of shared library and shared theming is this idea that I can create a UI. I can create like a file picker experience. And file picking, like, it might seem simple, but once you dig into it, man, you can take a large team to build out a very complex file picking experience because it's tied into OneDrive and it's tied on to authentication and all the various themes and dark mode and so on and so forth. Like, there's a ton of work that just goes into picking a file. Now you recognize in this large ecosystem of applications, like, how many different places are you picking files? It's like, man, it's everywhere. Like, everyone's picking files. Like, so what we can do now is we can say we have a single library that is themable that we can now bring as a package and drop in to all these various applications. You go into Teams and you pick a file, you're going to get the same file picker that you are using inside of OneDrive or SharePoint or anywhere else.
And that file picker is battle tested.
Yes.
And it's well understood, and it continues to innovate as your UX for file picking gets better, not my UX for file picking in SharePoint.
Exactly. And as we are able to have theming so strongly intertwined in here, like, it doesn't have to look like you've just jumped out of Teams into a different app to be able to get that file. Like, you're still in the Teams purple, the same fonts and the same icons. Everything is still the same, but it's the exact same code base. It's one team working on a single code base that is able to iterate and work on that project and distribute that throughout the rest of the applications.
Love it. That's a really great illustration of the value that a design system brings at scale. Do you want to talk about personal projects? Do you want to talk about anything that you're doing that's interesting? Like, what are you excited for in the world in the future? Are you into bonsai trees or anything like that right now?
I'm into baking right now. That's been my.
Oh, I saw that on Twitter the other day. You're making pretzel buns or something.
Man, those pretzel buns are amazing. Yeah, it was. I recognize that, like, we don't know what the world's going to be like in a month, and I'm not a prepper, but man, I feel a little bit better when I've got just a good stocked pantry and whatnot. And it'd be good to have some flour, and it's hard to find at the moment. And so I stop at Costco, and I'm like, well, they have flour, but they have 25-pound bags of flour. So I come home with a 25-pound bag of flour, and my wife rolls her eyes at me, and I'm like, well, it just means I got to use it. So yeah, it was, and I'm down to like maybe 30% of that flour. So I've definitely used it.
What's been your favorite thing you've baked? And by the way, I use the bacon analogy for design systems all the time.
Very nice. All right, but we can go there too. Pretzels definitely are. It's one of those where I've made a loaf of bread and we made some cinnamon rolls. Actually, cinnamon rolls are great, but they're just cinnamon rolls. Pretzels were really the neat thing. I think partially because it was a new process. It's you do the roll, you do the dough, you let it rise once, and then you portion it out into either a pretzel or a bun, and then you boil it in water and baking soda. And that kind of gives it a quick second proofing, and it boils the outside kind of skin of it so that when you give it a slice and put the bun down, the stuff that's exposed doesn't have any of that baking soda in it. So that's why you've got the white kind of meat in the middle with the brown skin around it. And it's a fun kind of science experiment, and just the flavor of it's amazing. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, a little bit of a mess, but man, totally worth it.
Yeah, I think that baking, like, a sign of good baking is it is a little bit of a mess. I feel like.
Well, this was definitely a success then, because I made the boiling baking soda on top of the stove just gets everywhere. It's pretty disgusting.
So, new dog, lots of baking, lots of other ways that you guys are making it through coronavirus. By the way, thanks for bearing with us in the like little weird audio hiccups in this episode and many others.
Yeah, usually this is when our lawnmowers come by, like right outside my window, but fortunately they decided not to come this time.
Right. It's just so much harder to control your environment when you don't have a studio that you can record in.
Totally.
Well, hey, Micah, awesome to have you, man. Really great to talk. And I'm wishing you the utmost success at, this transition to Fluent, and seeing what you guys are going to do next is got me excited. So keep on keeping on.
I'm excited to get there too. Well, it's great to catch up, and definitely looking forward to hearing more of the podcast in the future. And it's always a good topic to dive into. So give me a holler if there's anything else you ever want to talk about.
Yeah, sounds great. Again, this episode is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud or at knapsackcloud on Twitter. Have a great day, everyone. That's all for today. We'd love to hear from you with questions, ideas for new episodes, beer recommendations, or comments. You can find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. Cheers, and thanks for listening to the Design Systems Podcast.